Welcome to the Right Side Up podcast with your hosts Danielle, Strickland and James Scholl. This season is Need to Know, everything we want to tell Christian leaders about the future of the church and how empowering women is mission critical to a flourishing future. The book Need to Know will be available October 11th, but to get us started, we have many of the 21 authors to talk about the flourishing present, the flourishing future, and all things need to know. We are glad you are here.
Welcome, everybody, to Need to Know podcast. We're excited that you're here, and this is the Right Side Up, really, with me, Danielle Strickland, your host, and James Scholl is in the house.
Hello.
And we are excited to have two contributors to the Need to Know book that you're hearing about this season, and we're very excited about. It is comprehensive. It is, if I could, in my dream world, invite every male leader I know to a table of experts, people who know stuff that they need to know in terms of the future of the church and what we could do to see it flourish. These would be the people I would want them to listen to. And so I put all those people and those voices into a book, into a compilation. And we're here with two of those authors now. We have Lisa Rodriguez-Watson in the house, and we have Liz Ríos. Liz, let's start with you. That was the plan. So let's start with that. Liz, do you want to give us just an introduction to yourself? How is it to be you in the world? What are you up to? What do you do? And what's your background?
Sure. So I am an Afro-Latina from the Lower East Side of Manhattan and living in South Florida. There's been a lot of evolving in my life from being really immersed in the evangelical spaces to kind of like moving on the periphery because of the things that I do and teach. Not because I've wanted to, but because I've kind of like landed there. And so right now, I've been a pastor, I've been a higher ed academic leader, I've been a professor. But currently I founded and lead an organization that's called Passion to Plant, which is one of the few known national church planting networks, that was founded and led by a woman. And I teach global majority planters to start justice focused, holistic, churches. And I currently also lead a missional online faith community. So I was doing that before the pandemic, and before the pandemic, everybody thought I was crazy and not so much anymore. And I'm a spiritual daughter to, the Primitive Christian Church on the Lower East Side, which is a predominantly Hispanic church, and the Latino Pastoral Action Center in the Bronx, where I learned and got my chops in, learning about community development and really, working and partnering with people to bring about change in communities.
I love this. That's a lot to pack in, but your lived experience is I think it's so essential for us in the situation we find ourselves, particularly in the white Western church, where we're really floundering and these modes that we thought were wonderful turn out not to be that wonderful. And, so we're in this season of exposure, and like a lot of people are going like, what do we do? And I feel like many of these communities, many communities of color, but communities have been deep in the work of justice and holistic spaces, embodiment, not because it's like some fancy thing, but because it's like life lived together.
That's right.
Have so much to teach us, So thank you for doing all that work and being in those trenches, and then also being gracious enough to, when we're ready, to say, here are some keys, here are some ideas, here are some truths that we hold to be true. We're thankful for you. We're going to get to your chapter in a sec, but Lisa Rodriguez-Watson, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and how you come?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. I live in Washington, D.C., have lived here for the better part of a decade. I'm the national director of an organization called Missio Alliance, and we curate content and conversations around some of the most pressing things facing the church, primarily in North America, but also have some folks Western Europe and Australia as well. I am a pastor. I'm associate pastor at my local church, just about a mile from where I live, Christ City Church, and mom of 3 kids. I don't know if I mentioned that, I just took my oldest to college yesterday, so did the launching thing for the very first time. I'm Cuban American. My father was born in Cuba, came to the United States as a 10-year-old boy back in the early 1960s. And so I speak, I write, I pastor, I lead from that place of being a Cuban American woman who is called to ministry and blessed to get to do the work that I do.
Amazing. So basically, everyone listening, we've got I don't know if I'm allowed to say this in front of you, but just like badass women, Jesus followers, like disciplers, church planters, leaders with lots of influence and lots of lived experience who have graciously contributed to this book, which we're so excited about. Yeah. So let's talk to us about what you wrote, because it's fiery and good and really necessary, because I think what you touch on in this book actually has is like a root of all the other things. So tell us a little bit about what you wrote, what you're passionate about, and we can talk about it.
Sure. So I basically wrote about, more kingdom, less empire, and looking at a different way of leadership and leadership structure. So I talk about collaborative leadership and what that looks like, and why it's such a needed thing in a world where we have all been swimming in empire. And I try to just paint the picture of this is where we've been and this is where we are now. And this is the things that we need to do to reconsider the way we've been doing ministry. And I come from the lens of being a, Afro-Boricua, Gen X woman, New Yorker, because we got this certain way of doing things, I'm told. And then living in the hotbed, literally and politically, right, of the Southern Florida. So, I talk about how empire has just been influencing everything that we know as Christianity. And again, I think it's really important for this chapter in the sense that a lot of people don't think about it. I know for myself, you have to be exposed to the information so that you can make the decisions about what you want to do. Most people don't wake up in the morning and say, hey, let me continue to function in this patriarchal system where I devalue women and things like that. They just do it because that's what they've seen. That's what they've lived. So I'm hoping that this chapter, looking through how we've always been in this place, and now that here in North America, we're looking at this a little bit more. And I say North America because this is the book that we're kind of putting out there. But of course, in other parts of the country and internationally, people are talking about empire as well. I believe that this will help people to see, like, what are the differences? How can they tell, what really is empire and what really is a kingdom way of doing things? Because what I'm advocating for is, to do things in a kingdom way and not in an empire way.
Yeah, I think especially when the kingdom has been presented as like the empire and kingdom have been conflated as one thing. And
that's right.
So then half the works, I feel like much of the panic that the Western church is in right now in terms of people losing their faith, I put that quotations on that, is really not them losing their faith. It's them awakening to the fact that this is not quite what faith is. There is a conflation. So really what they're doing is waking up to this empire disguised as faith.
Right.
And that's only good news if you're kingdom minded. If you're a Jesus follower and listen to the person of Jesus who presented an alternative way in empire that he was in, this is good news. But how does you're hoping this chapter might wake people up or maybe even connect some dots to like, this is actually what's happening?
Yeah, because Christianity, it's hardly understood apart from empire. Right. It's so enmeshed. I mean, goodness, you just don't know it. I remember hearing an illustration of someone saying, it's like getting a paper and then ripping it and then trying to put it back together. That's the way that empire is with Christianity. And the thing is that a lot of people, again, they're just not aware. And now in the society that we're living in, where a lot of people, again, I'm giving people the benefit of the doubt that they are not as aware as the people maybe in this room, right? And that once they get this information, that they will be able to tell the differences and see how, again, this is not about guilt, giving people guilt. It's about making you aware so that you understand that nobody escapes the force field of empire completely. You're going to be, birthed into this, but you can be rebaptized in kingdom.
Mm-hmm. My favorite part of your chapter, and it's all fiery and all great, is just saying like how at odds we are as followers with Jesus with the way of empire. And you list these reasons that empire prefers violence over peace, and empire prefers authoritarian rule over servant leadership. Empire prefers exclusivity over inclusivity. Empire prefers revenge over forgiveness. Empire prefers the accumulation of wealth over sharing with the community. Empire prefers celebrity over humility. It goes on. There's so many, and it's all so good, and you just realize how at odds. And it's so obvious, and then you're reading it like, yeah, this is so at odds with where we are. And even where the church is as well. I think that's what's kind of sad, right? Is we kind of go, well, the ways of the world, they like their celebrities and they like their money. It's like, no, that's what we're doing too. That's what we've fallen for it. We swallowed it, man.
Mm-hmm. That's right. And that's why I was hoping for that. You could see like the picture, like very clearly, this or that. What are you going to choose? This or that? Because it's one thing to be ignorant and not understand and be able to have that clear picture. But once you have that clear picture, what are you going to decide to do? And then that will really tell you if you are a Jesus follower or not.
Wow. I feel like the first people to feel, or the people that catch this first, are the ones who are on the bottom end of empire, which is why Jesus's manifesto was to the poor, because they're the first ones. It's like they're the first ones to see more clearly than anybody else, because of course you see it when you feel the pain of it. So when empire begins to actually take over and push you down and dominate and control and like use fear as a motivator and all that stuff, you start to feel it, and then you can see it so clearly, which is why listening to voices on the margin and listening to voices that are on the underside of empire are either a threat to those who don't want to see, or a beautiful gift to those who want to see, and so that I feel like even in that chapter, that's part of it too, is to say like listening is half of the way that you start to understand. It's that prophetic thing Jesus says is, he who has ears, let him hear, those who have eyes, let them see. Like listen to those that have felt the impact of this before. And now I feel like we're at a season where everybody's feeling a little bit of the pain, which is inevitable because the empire will dominate everyone in the end. Nobody wins ultimately with empire.
That's right. It's
one of the basic gracious of you to come to this without judgment, but just with information. How do you keep your, as a woman from the context in which you've been in and working, and you even mentioned like you didn't mean to be on the margins, but here you are, you've been kind of pushed there. How do you stay gracious? How do you stay in a place where you're presenting this information from a heart of tenderness and hope? And how do you do that?
Well, I make sure I have me some iced coffee on occasion. those little treats. But also, I have a good circle of sisters, that keep me sane. So when I do want to pull my hair out, they tell me it's okay to pull your hair out, but then you got to go back to do what you've been called to do. Because sometimes we need people to remind us why we're here, Yeah. And so making sure that I have self-care, and I take my breaks, build margin into my life, say no on occasion, and, be able to continue to also learn. I think, having that posture of learning, and you're more graceful with other people when you know you didn't arrive where you're at when you were born. You had to evolve and you had to be exposed to things. So I think that helps me to have more belief in the opportunities to share the information, and hope that, yes, it'll fall on good soil, and some people will take it and run with it. And then some people, I understand, won't. Because again, as you mentioned earlier, empire is about control. So, there's some people that no matter what, they don't want to give up control. And so once you have the information and you know who you are, and, like Maya Angelou says, right? When people show you who they are, believe them. Mm-hmm. So I do.
Yeah.
I'm struck, Liz, that when you were saying, like, you laid out the parallels of this is what kingdom is. It's this or that, this or that. How it reminded me of Moses, I think it was Moses, in Deuteronomy, where he's like, this is the way forward. You can choose life or you can choose death. If you choose empire, we make a choice for oppression, for control, for a continued, just a heavy-handed, which ultimately leads to death, or we choose kingdom and we choose life. And I think that that's a beautiful invitation of your chapter, is you just lay it out so clearly and say, what will we choose? Will we choose life? Because in fact, the church has been co-opted. And that's why, as you say, Danielle, there's just so much exposure, so much apocalypse, that we're feeling the foundations of what we have come to be comfortable with being ruptured and shaken up, which is so necessary. But that co-opting needs to be undone. And I think you do a beautiful job of saying, hey, like, we have a choice. Which way are we going to go?
Yeah, well, thank you for that. I really appreciate that affirmation. And honestly, being in the church planting space, everybody's always talking about the church is dying, people are not coming, all these different things. And it's like, well, do something about it, and the main thing is being able to talk about these real things that are happening. And, people are talking about deconstruction, and that's like leading people, to leave God per se. Honestly, in many ways, it's not. It's leading people to ask questions that they never dared ask in certain spaces because they weren't safe. And so if people do make that decision to say, you know what, even though I've been immersed and swimming in empire, I'm going to make a shift and move into a kingdom theology. What's going to happen is there's going to be more empowerment. There's going to be more visibility, more representation of women. There's going to be changes of policy in churches, right? Because a lot of people, that have the policy, but they don't have the practice, right? So making sure that the policy's there, but the practice follows soon after. And there's going to be more solidarity, just a whole bunch of things that will help the church flourish. And guess what? Maybe, just maybe, we'll shift the conversation. And instead of saying the church is dying, we'll be talking about the church is flourishing.
Mm-hmm.
I think
that's what we're after.
Yeah. Oh,
and that is not hard. I mean, the early church flourished without domination, with the liberating message of the gospel, the good news, and then the embodiment of that and the practice of that. That's when the good news flourishes. That's when it naturally grows. So I agree 100%. Liz, if you were sitting next to, a major, like a big church male leader, maybe the head of a denomination or somebody that kind of oversaw a bunch of these churches that are struggling right now and wondering about their future, and what would you specifically say to that man? Because I think that's kind of what we need to talk to them. There's more men pastors named John in the United States than there are female pastors put together. So if we were sitting next to a male pastor named John, what would you say to that?
I've never been more pleased to be called James. I'm just going to say that right now.
Well, gosh, I would have to tell him we have to have some cafecito. And I would say, mi hermano John, I know that you think that a lot of things may be happening that you have no control over, especially in the church, maybe your church. But there's a lot of things you do have control over. And one of those things is the DNA of your church, and if you are able to just rethink what kind of church you want to be, regardless of what church you have been. Because that's the beauty of Jesus, the gospel, that we always have an opportunity to come back at it again, right? And be renewed and be refreshed and be redeemed even. So I would say, what's the DNA of your church? Where do you want your church to be 5 years from now? Let's think about how you can change some of the pillars that right now are the organizational culture of your church, because everybody has them. And I would say, consider being an authentic witness. Consider being a person, a church that from the pulpit to the pews, you're already telling people that we have to, resist oppressive structures and systems. And let's go back to what Jesus stood for. This whole thing about that justice is not a Jesus thing, but a man-made thing. I'm like, where do people get this stuff, right? So John, my hermano, I want you to think about community and how when you change the DNA of the church, you are fostering a strong community where people are going to have these shared values and they're going to keep each other accountable, And maybe one last thing. I would say, John, people grow, mi hermano, when they feel loved, when they feel seen, when they feel valued. When they start seeing that in the community, you're going to have to get more space. You're going to have other parishes around the community, because you're not going to be able to help how you're sprouting.
I love that so much.
So
when love is in the house is packed.
Mm-hmm.
That's good.
You touched on this, but yeah, there's kind of talk of the church is dying and people are leaving. And then whenever we ask that kind of question, why, it's so rarely, it's so rarely because I don't believe in Jesus anymore. It's actually because I've got to know who Jesus is. I can't be here anymore.
That's right.
And you've told me that in order to love Jesus and be part of this family, I have to actually uphold empire instead of Jesus. Like, I have to exclude women. I have to not see them as equal. And I'm going to walk away from that, not because of, I'm walking away because of Jesus, not in spite of Jesus.
That's right.
I can't be around. And this is it. I just have this conversation all the time with people like, oh, people are leaving because I'm like, but they're leaving for the right reason. They're leaving for the same reason Jesus left your building. Right. Like, don't worry.
Because they actually want to be Jesus followers.
Yeah, they're following Jesus where he is.
Right.
And sadly, it's not alongside you in your exclusion and your cruelty and your, again, lack of justice, right? It blows my mind. Like, can we just open a page of the Bible and not find justice somewhere? It's fascinating to me how we've
exactly
got
it's
here.
Throughout the whole canon of scripture. Like, which part are you missing here? I'll send you the missing pieces. But the other thing, like you mentioned too, is that what people are really saying is, don't bring critical thinking into the church.
Yeah.
And in the Latino community, a lot of people just listen to what the pastor says and they don't question anything. And so. That's a problem, because in the American Bible Society did a report a few years ago, and they said that in the United States, we're biblically illiterate. So they're not reading the Bible. They're taking whoever's up in the pulpit and just taking their word for it. They're not like the Bereans, right? Showing themselves to be approved and understanding that they have to educate themselves, right? And so that's why we have the problem that we have, that we're seeing with our very eyes, living through it in North America right now.
Yeah, that's a good point of just like the reason you're not following Jesus the way that Jesus invites you to is because you're not actually in the scriptures. Like it's not hard, to actually have a look at that. Okay, we've kicked off a season called Need to Know, and the reason we've done that is it is in conjunction with Need to Know the book. Now, there is a website you're going to need to know, which is need-to-know-book.com. A lot of dashes, need-to-know-book.com. The link will be in the show notes. And this is where all the things will be. Get this book into the hands of every leader that you know, because this is need to know for every Christian leader about the future of the church and how the empowerment of women are a big part of that. So go there, read this stuff, write the reviews, and spread the word and help us get this out. There's really no use. And actually, I'm a little bit tired of talking about this stuff, but it not being heard by the people that need to hear it the most. So we need help. So if you'd like to join our launch team, you can go to the website and just press launch team and join us. There's lots of perks in there, but also a great company of people who want to spread good news everywhere. The other key area that you could help us, and I'm very excited about this, is there's an ally section. Allies. Now, men come to me all the time these days and say, I am all for this. I think it's essential. Conversation, I think it's an essential practice, but I don't know what to do. Well, here you go, guys. Here's something that you could actually do. Be an ally. And there's an ally section. What the allies will do is use the book as a resource. So start book studies locally or on your web platforms. Highlight in whatever way you have, either in your pulpit or in your Bible study or your home group or on your podcast, a couple of authors in the book, a couple contributors, which there are 21. So there's a plethora of experts on various topics. And then just genuinely stand in solidarity that this is something that needs to change for the future of the church. So if that's you, please ally. Now, you don't have to be a guy to be an ally, but boy, that would be good. So we have a good start, but I would love there to be 500 allies. I mean, why not? And it is time, actually. Women can't just from the outside keep, shouting. I mean, we will, but we can't keep shouting. We actually need allies who will help us get this message out and embed it, get it in to the cultures and to the system. So anyway, this is what we're calling you to, but launch team, please help us. And allies, we need you. Need-to-know-book.com. Now's the time. That's really fascinating too, that the place that has the most, opportunity to read and study the scriptures is the one that's the most, not doing it, Lisa, you have the last word in the book and also in this episode, it would appear. So tell me a little bit about what you wrote, why you wrote it, and then what this means, what you would also say to pastors that are or leaders that are listening right now.
Yeah. I actually wrote my chapter on the holy work of resistance. And it begins with actually the very first two women that we see in the scriptures, who were resistors, against the empire of Egypt, of the time. And Shiphrah and Puah, they were midwives. They get like 6 verses in the entire scripture, but their story is so inspirational, because when they were given the command to kill babies in their community, they said, no, we're not going to do that. And they found a way to resist, to subvert, and to continue to bring life to their community. And I think that is a beautiful image of what we actually are doing, what this book is about. We're continuing to bring life and to call forth life because the church needs women. And,
That's right. Amen.
And as long as you're trying to cut it off at the stream, it's just not going to work. There will be after effects that's going to feel like death. It's going to look like death. It might be some sorts of death. And I think with this book, what we get the opportunity to do is to say, no, we will subvert the system. We will talk about resistance. We will talk about the things that need to change in order for churches and for communities and for believers to flourish. So I write about resistance and talk about tokenism a little bit, because there's always this reactive response. Oh, things are better. Things are getting better. They're improving. Look at the improvements we've made since the 1950s. Okay, sure. But are we addressing where we're just changing the optics? We're fine to put a woman up on a photo. We're fine to put a person of color in the midst of, our whatever pamphlet or flyer or web page. Are we really addressing the core issues? So dealing with tokenism, dealing with actually allowing women to have influence at the table, rather than just saying, oh, okay, giving a title and then not actually listening to women and giving them the place of influence. So those are a few things I write about in the chapter.
One thing I think it's really interesting. And Danielle said elsewhere, the hope is that this book is, there's some people that aren't going to read this book, and that's okay.
Right.
Then they're so far away from reading this book. But the hope is there's people that are like well-intentioned, but they're not there. And I will say, I don't have as much patience for those people as I should. But I'm a white man. I have to have patience for anything. The world was created for me. But I'm learning from my sisters what it looks like to be more patient with people. One of the things you touch on for a fair bit is like the Billy Graham rule, which I like to make fun of. Also, me and Danielle recorded so many podcasts together, so we like smash that rule as much as possible. But I think what's interesting is you're actually quite sympathetic to it, whilst also saying how problematic it was, all the damage that it's done. And so I wonder if there's any room to speak to that. Like, what does it look like to say, you know what, sometimes we're not questioning your intentions, but we've seen the outcomes and the fruit is bad and we're not doing it. Like, what, is there a question there? Does that work?
It's a tough thing for me, because I think I have such a strong view against the Billy Graham rule.
And me too, 100%. Like,
crazy.
It's
I
awful.
do. It's awful.
It's
I
terrible.
want to pull my hair out. There are all these ways that I even find not even specifically Billy Graham rule. The whole like, okay, we're gonna just side hug, and brothers will walk up next to me and they're coming in for a hug and I can see it and I'm willing to embrace as a sister and they're scoop side hug and I'm like, okay, and that's not the same thing as the Billy Graham rule, and I understand there would be a number of reasons for that. Also, when we continue to find ways to not relate to each other as brother and sister, as equals, as in ways that are honoring and reflecting something that is more beautiful than she's just a temptation, he's just a temptation. There's going to be a problem here if we just relate to each other as brother and sister. I think we cut ourselves short. We really sell ourselves short, and we limit what is possible. So if I come into contact with folks who are sort of Billy Graham rule-ish, and it's like, oh, I'm heading back to the office and, see you over there, or you can't ride with me. I'm probably in that moment not going to name that and challenge it in the moment, but we'll circle back later and have a conversation, because it's not always about that moment. I think what I loved, Liz, about how you were talking about Pastor John is the nurturing and familial nature of a relationship. Is hermano, like, let's have this conversation. It's like almost let me put my arm around you and come alongside and say, let's walk this road together. Confrontation has to happen sometimes in the moment. It is right and it is necessary. So hear me say that. And I think I'm also looking for opportunities to come alongside brothers and be like, let's just revisit that. If you don't want to sit on the same side of the booth as me at a business meeting when we've got another person or two people because I'm a woman, let's have a conversation about that. Where does that come from? Can we talk? What are some of the positives of that? What are some of the problems of that? What does that make me feel as a professional in a business context? So I don't know, James, if that gets to answering your question, but there's not just one right way to react. I think we have to be discerning as to when we confront in the moment, when we come alongside, and how we tell the truth always.
I just want to say to that's the way to build relationship too. Like when you see that, if you're not going to, because you have to be able to discern when's the right time to talk about these things, like you mentioned. But if you want to build relationship, circling back to that is really important, because at that moment we could probably be teaching them something. And the other thing is, having this mindset that women are these sexual, creatures that are always looking to, take something from the man or something, or the man can't control themselves. It's a major obstacle to collaborative leadership, which is what I also talk about, right? Like if you can't even be in a room with a woman, because you're thinking all these other things, there's no way that there's going to be an opportunity for collaborative leadership. So
That's right.
you have to make a decision there too. Do you want to? I mean, I mentioned some people like Inez McBride. She's working with a person that is not her husband, which is a different model. There's a Midtown Church that they're two male pastors and a woman, which is another different kind of thing. Those are models that are collaborative. And I mean, I would love to have a conversation with them just to see, like, did this ever come up? Because I think, especially in more conservative spaces, this is always the issue. Like, we got to be careful. And, even how we dress, right? Even how we go up to the pulpit and all these other things. So if people really want to have success, I think, a new model of ministry, collaborative leadership is the way, and the Billy Graham rule and all the other things that come with it got to be put on the shelf.
That's right.
I think for me, that's part of the resistance that, like, one of the things the empire always tries to do is make this false dichotomy. So like, you either choose the Billy Graham rule and integrity and, like, safety, or you choose nothing and you're, tempted and you have no accountability and you're not integral. And it's like, guys, many of the most integral leaders I know are intentionally committed to, equity and shared leadership and communal spaces, Jesus included, and so I feel like, it's a false, it's like leaders will go, well, then what will I do? I was like, well, you could just choose wisdom and integrity.
Right.
Like, you could decide in instances what to do. What is the wisest thing to do here? There are times where I will not be alone with a man because that man is not trustworthy to be alone with, which actually is almost statistically true of all male leaders. But anyway, I would say that's my choice as a leader. And that's somebody, I'm going to bring somebody with me into that room, or I'm going to leave those doors open or whatever, because this is what this situation demands, not because of some gender token, stereotypical, we can't trust each other. So it's also just this false dichotomy. And it's just not true in other spaces that I'm at where the abusive male leadership is on exposure right now across every denomination. So we can see, maybe the problem's not the women after all. Maybe the problem is inherent in the way we're teaching people to lead and the kind of levels of a lack of integrity and actually just toxicity that is at present inside of male leaderships and male leadership models. So part of my hope in even your chapters on resistance, like, I'd like to say to Johns and men's everywhere, resist that. Yeah. Resist the caricature of that. Resist being a man who can't be trusted by your wife or by your community or by yourself or by the Spirit to be a good man. Like, resist that even idea that you have to have some sort of weird medieval, devaluing and highly sexualization of relationships and women and men. And, like, resist that. You do not have to live that way. And I love that. The resistance, wrote an article called The Power of Lukewarm, and how you cannot change the stasis of a culture without extreme behavior, without, like, actual intention. So I was trying to make a cold bath in Mexico, and it was like all the ice in the resort couldn't make it cold enough because the water that came out of the tap was lukewarm. And I didn't realize that lukewarm had such power to it. I always just thought it was like nothing. And that revelation that, no, it has power to suck things, to actually absorb this other thing, which I think is why God doesn't like it, that this stasis, the status quo of patriarchy or male domination, or this suspicious leadership practices like the Billy Graham rule are the status quo. That's, and we've got to fight it. You have to actually fight it by resisting, not agreeing with it. So you got to come out of agreement with it, and then you have to keep resisting by getting savvy and wise. So that's one of the other things about Shipra and Pua, that I think are awesome, is that they're savvy, they're wise. Like, they don't directly confront Pharaoh or they're going to die. They kind of sidestep. Most females actually in the scripture have to sidestep that power, but then God honors them. And actually in the telling even of the story, one of my favorite details is that Pharaoh's unnamed and the midwives are named, which means in the telling of that story, God cares about the names of the leaders who are actually resisting empire, not about the head of the empire. That's just like one more pharaoh. We don't even know. Like historians have to go try to find out which pharaoh it is because the Bible doesn't mention it, because it doesn't matter to God that a pharaoh acts like a pharaoh. What matters to God is that midwives obey him and do what he says over the empire. So that resistance is so powerful. And are there any other like specific, so this idea of resistance of like, one, I refuse the status quo. So I think, and Liz, I think you were saying that to the pastor, like you have choices to make and you feel like all the choices are being taken from you and that you're just like caught in this system and there's nothing you can do. That's empire talking. That's always the empire talking. There's nothing to be done. Oh, woe is us. Like there's nothing we can do. The gospel says, oh no, there's a lot you can do. And the first thing is to refuse the status quo. We will not go silently into the night as the Western. We will not look like the American dream. We will not. What are some other resistance exercises? Like when you're talking to people now that are listening, what else can they do? So they come out of agreement. They can actually actively listen to God. I feel like that's what, because they cared more about what God thought than what the Pharaoh thought, they said no. That's literally like the line in the scripture, which I love. Do you care more about what God thinks than what your people think, what your financiers think, what the world thinks? That's a big resistance strategy. What are some other resistance strategies for people?
I would say find a friend. Get your friends together is a resistance. This is a short story. My friend recently had a fence put up kind of in the back of her house because they're getting ready to build. This place used to be a church. A beautiful Latino congregation used to worship there. They outgrew it and they sold it. And I live in Washington, D.C., and almost any property, it's just going to go straight to developers and more housing, more condos. So that's what happened. They recently put the fence up. And she had been thinking, man, I just want to go and get some of those flowers from the front of the church and just plant them in my own space. And I told her, I said, this is what resistance is. Jump the fence, get the flowers, and plant them in your own space because nobody cares about the beauty of that space and maintaining its story like you do. So yeah, they put the fence up. But this is what resistance is. You jump that fence, you take what's beautiful and you preserve it. And I think that's the beauty of tell your story, say what is needed, and then you get a friend and then you do the thing together.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, that's really important because that's where you process trying to live justly, right? With your friends, and people in your home. And again, in the Latino community, yes, everything's around the kitchen and let's eat and let's talk, But I think also the education and awareness that we were talking about, yes, you make a decision that you're going to go to the source, look at the scriptures, and then also look at the scriptures from the posture of the marginalized. Not the way we've always been used to reading scripture, right? So some of my friends say, decolonize the way you read the Bible, So I think that's really important to educate yourself about that. And also to educate yourself about history because everything is kind of intertwined. And so when you understand history, because it may not be something that's talked in the church because sometimes some of our pastors are not educated in those areas. Or again, it's now that I've seen, in the last maybe 20 years that more and more pastors are going back to school and learning. But then where are they going? What are they learning, right? And we have so many people that want to erase history. So, you have the power over yourself. So you can say, I want to learn more. So pick up a book. That's always the best thing. Pick up a book. You have the Bible with you, learning from, the marginalized, the voices on the margins. And then look at history, look at the impact of empire and colonialism and what that's done. And maybe read works from people that are, different from you, like, liberation theologists or decolonial theologians or people that are, talking about mujerista, womanist or whatever, critical perspective is out there. And it's not to say that you have to agree with all of them, but you want to be informed. And then again, eat the chicken, spit out the bones, as my old pastor used to say. And, see what, is important for your particular context. Because again, it's about context too. What happens in South Florida is not what's happening in New York City. And don't I know it? So that's important, and listen to people that are different from you. I mean, we have so many people, thank God for technology. We have so many people that are out there, making people aware of so many different things. Look at, listen to their podcasts like this one. Look at Instagram, see who's influencing in the ways of the gospel, and I think, just widen your circle of people that pour into you, even from, afar.
I love this so much because basically I feel like one of the key things that keeps coming, we haven't said out loud, but I feel like the empire runs on fear. And what we keep saying over and over again is don't be afraid, right, which actually seems to echo what Jesus kept saying and what God says all through the scriptures. Like, don't be afraid. Fear is not the currency of the kingdom. Love is. Mm-hmm. And openness and curiosity and wonder, those are all kingdom fueled things. But fear is empire fueled. So pay attention to where you're afraid, even in this conversation. What gets you fearful, then pay attention to that, because that's where empire has a grip, wherever fear is dominating you. And then what would it look like for you not to be so afraid? And that would lead you definitely in the way of love, which is the way of the kingdom. Also, it strikes me that, Liz, you're in the middle of a storm. You're doing this podcast in the middle of the storm, which is like an excellent example of resistance. And also kind of what happens, because the other thing I think is the empire promises things like, if you accept Jesus, everything will be great. It's a lie that it offers. And then people think that Jesus is the lie, except Jesus never promised that, not in a million years. He actually said the opposite. And so it's actually the truth that to challenge empire, to speak up for the oppressed, to be open and curious and love driven, will bring a storm. It will have that element to it. And then in the middle of the podcast, I kept having to mute my mic because construction has just happened in my garage. And I was like, isn't this hilarious? Because I feel like the work of resistance is like, we're all under construction. Like the tape is up. Like this is not happening in some vacuum, in some perfect situation where we're just like, this will all work. This is perfect. This is work. This is work, what we're doing. This is a challenge. This is a storm. This is work. This is doing it anyway, even though it's hard, because it's worthy. And so I love what you guys have contributed. I love what you're doing in the world. Your voices are so important and filled with lived wisdom and experience and expertise. So we're honored to have you share them with us. It's just a taste. We don't want to give it all away because we want people to read the book, need to know. Both of these beautiful people are featured in it, and many others, and a great company of witnesses that I believe are shouting out in the wilderness, this is the way of the Lord. This is the way of the Lord. And it's good news, people. It is good. And
just like Liz was saying there, if you're thinking okay, but my bookshelf has a lot of people that look real similar, this book's a good place. It sounds like I'm just plugging the book, but actually it's because I love it, because I believe in this thing. We're having a conversation with Liz Ríos and Lisa Rodriguez Watson. If you don't have names on your shelf that aren't just white names, start. This will give you a taste and it'll get you hooked. I'm just sure of it. I just love it. So
yeah, that is part of the hope, is that in so giving you 21 different witnesses that have beautiful things and expertise. So each of them have different areas of expertise. So the hope is, read a chapter and then look into what else is available. That speaking of which, Liz, how do people follow you? How do people get in touch and follow and get into what you're doing?
Yeah, so I'm on all platforms, Dr. Liz Ríos, and my website is elizabethrios.com.
Yeah, you can find most of my work at Missio Alliance. You can follow Missio Alliance at Missio Alliance on all of the platforms, and then you can follow me individually at Elrod Watson on Instagram, Lisa Rodriguez Watson on Facebook.
I'm also not amazing at social media, don't worry.
That's
great. Follow me on Twitter, you'll never see anything.
You
That's
can follow me if you want, but...
Yeah, Twitter's become a bit of a dead end.
It is,
yeah.
Speaking of empire. Anyway, thank you so much for your time. And let's just spread the good news that God is up to some beautiful things in the world, and you get to be part of it.